Yeah, okay, so I'm gonna get started. Let's zoom in over here. So whenever I go for a run, I have noticed I take on a character. I assume a character that I think will help me run longer and in better form. When I run, I decide to become an athlete for the time being, even though I haven't really deserved that title. On a particularly imaginative day, I can clearly hear the radio commentators discussing my strategies as I run. Except, unlike in a real race or competition, I'm responsive to what they say about me. My back straightens when they critique my posture. My pace quickens when they question my conservative style. Maybe this kind of imagining process occupies me. Maybe it takes my mind off the struggles of running. But maybe it makes me that bit more a runner, a real runner, at least for the time being. So I have a runner character. I've presumed it to be a good character to inhabit when I want to run. But what if I were to take this character out of her usual running context and into some other terrain? What, for example, could this character tell me about my research, if anything? And who has this character replaced in this special case, when I decide to research as a runner? Presumably, this character has then replaced some kind of academic character. I think I know this academic character. I've been her too. Not when I wanted to go for a run, but when I wanted to learn things for myself and for others. Wanted to learn for the sake of learning. Learn in a way that stood in for learning in general as well as in particular. Like the athletic runner stands in for the desire to exceed her physical limits, the academic character stands in for the desire to learn. She not only learns, she is a learner. She teaches us how to learn when there is no longer anyone there to teach us. The academic character deals with things earnestly, transparently. She is scrupulous, parsing predecessors, passing for errors or for gaps that she can correct for the common good. She believes in this pursuit, believes that the sum total of her efforts might fractionally tilt the future toward a happier trajectory. The academic character, like the running character, is a means to an end. She is enabling in that regard. She sets me up for success. The academic character acts, speaks, writes by the power vested in her. She not only learns, she is a learner, and this is what helps her learn. My academic character is ethically minded. She worries about truth, worries about the way in which truths are sometimes excluded in the name of consistency, in the name of unifying narratives. She does not tell a lie or even bend the truth a little in favor of her thesis when presenting her evidence. She faithfully reports processes and discloses everything. To tell the truth, she realizes she must declare her position within the research community and the global community. She must declare her partiality, her situated knowledge, the contextual nature of her perspective, and be transparent. But sometimes it is precisely in her effort to tell the truth that she commits the pretense, and maybe too the pretension, with which academics are sometimes accused. Perhaps this road is paved precisely by her good intentions. So I have come to think that there might be something insincere about the sincerity with which I, at least, adopt the academic character. And I came to this thought after reading one of my own pieces of writing. So this is a 2021 publication that I contributed to together with fellow art researchers on the PhD program at Goldsmiths. And the piece I contributed is called The Shape of a Thinking Thing. And at the time I thought this was definitely going to be part of my thesis, and that my thesis was going to be like a text thesis, a printed thesis. And the general idea behind this text I still really like, and I'll probably continue to use, but one piece of criticism I received on this really stuck with me and got me thinking about my research character. The text starts by making the case that the simplified models that we use to picture something more complicated or difficult to imagine are always worth revisiting, since they can often define the very terms upon which important debates play out. So the example I use is the ancient debate about whether the world is finite or infinite. And this question is very important because if the world is finite, then this is the kind of problem people can run into. But of course, as we can easily see now, it is the assumed worldview that the world is flat, which itself preempts this finite versus infinite debate. When someone comes along and suggests that the world might be round rather than flat, not only does this new worldview pose a solution of sorts to the debate, but it renders the term finite and infinite it renders these terms utterly irrelevant as categories, because in a round Earth model, both of these designations can be seen to be, in a sense, true. The Earth is finite in the sense that it's not endlessly large, and it is infinite in the sense that you could travel around it in one direction forever. The shape with which we pictured the world set the terms for the entire debate, and only now is it plain to see how the original question itself was based on a critical assumption. So the point that I'm making in that text has its roots in Thomas Kuhn's notion of paradigm shifts in his analysis of scientific revolutions of the past. And having established this, that, the idea that models, paradigms, shapes, images, and intuitions all have the power to play a determining role in setting the terms of our most urgent communal negotiations, in my text, I then tried to reflect on the various models we imagine selves, persons, souls, spirits, subjects, individuals, or thinking things to have, in order to see if such imaginations might have an equally determining effect on the way in which public conversations about identity, agency, freedom, sovereignty, things like that, take place. And in the text, I discuss three types of shapes. So I have the vessel here is one kind of shape. The distributed person gives a different kind of shape. And then there's my own proposed model, which is a line. And sometimes I call this a string theory of self. And while I was writing this text in character, so to speak, as an academic, and so adopting the role of an academic, which is informed by other academics and the culture of the academy, I did something which, in retrospect, I think I didn't really intend with this text, and I was recently criticized for it in a way that sort of stuck with me. So what happened is the text is trying to sort of expose this vessel model as a poor model, something a bit like the flat earth model, inadequate, misleading, primitive. And in its place, the text declares the line model as if it were an improvement on the last. In fact, although the vessel model indeed does fail to illustrate some properties of the self that my line model succeeds in highlighting, the vessel model is not wrong, as the text here seems to be indicating. And in some ways, it is useful to think of the self as a vessel, as a container with something hidden inside. And in fact, the flat earth model is not entirely wrong either, because in certain senses, and from certain perspectives, it is far more useful and then in some sense more true to think of the world as flat than round, when navigating a road map, for instance. What I really should have done with this text is simply acknowledge that these shapes, such as the shape of the earth or the shape of a thinking thing, or models or intuitive diagrams of this sort, these are just thinking tools that enable us to intuit different properties of a phenomenon. For example, a physics textbook might contain several drawings, several different kinds of drawings of the atom, and each emphasize a different property or observed behavior of the atom in action. And some drawings focus purely on different electron orbitals, like in this model here. And they barely feature any information on the nucleus. You can see how small it is in this, how small the nucleus is in these pictures. And then you have other diagrams which emphasize the nucleus, like this one here, but they grossly simplify the electron orbitals. And looking at this diagram here, it is true that some models have been finally discarded in favor of others, and often secondary school textbooks will portray these models as a progression like this from better to worse. But even at the level of the state of the art in any given discipline, I would say, there may be several different pictures of the same phenomenon that variously highlight some specific facet or mechanism at the expense of another. And I'll come to this later, but scientific models of just like these are another kind of character, in the sense in which I use the word in my research. And character is an enabling form of difference that always comes at the expense of what it necessarily excludes. So hold on to this idea of a duality of empowerment and expense in character, as it will likely be a recurring theme throughout this project. So what I should have done with my text is presented the vessel model and my proposed line model as two different models of thinking things that emphasize different properties of thinking things at the expense of the properties that it does not emphasize. Yet the text pretends that my line model is superior to the vessel model. And this is something that annoys me a lot now when I read the text, but you know, what's done is done. There will be other texts like the one we are writing now, for example. So when I look in retrospect and think like what was going through my mind for the text to have this kind of effect, I think that what probably happened is that, having assumed the academic character, I inflated the shortcomings of the vessel model and at the same time exaggerated the utility of my line model in order to achieve a familiar scholarly movement. And that is the movement by which a scholar identifies a gap and then subsequently fills it, thereby making a contribution to knowledge. The funny thing is, I now read this movement in this particular text as quite disingenuous, because it simply wasn't necessary to disown the vessel model and replace it with my apparently improved version in order to make my contribution. It would have been great just to look at these models side by side, but at the time of writing, I remember feeling like I was approaching the task very sincerely. So shortly after this criticism I received about my underestimation of the vessel model, I was rereading N. Catherine Hale's My Mother Was a Computer, and here I began to read a similar kind of stylistically motivated and perhaps unnecessarily inflated kind of aggression towards preceding theories and their authors. And it was a section on computational ontology, which is a way of picturing the universe that imagines it to be fundamentally computational. So that means that the universe is basically what you get when you run a program on some computational substratum. And the program may be actually extremely simple, but complexity emerges from it on higher levels of organization as the program runs. And Hales proceeds to chart out a history of this set of ideas, giving credit where credit's due about the findings that promote this computational worldview, and then tries to make that familiar scholarly movement whereby she identifies flaws in previous authors' thinking as a means of preparing the ground for her contribution. And there is nothing inherently wrong with this. Of course, it makes a lot of sense as a principle. You try to improve upon the past work of others, especially as new findings come to light and you have more observations and data to work with. Yet I found that the historical momentum of the academic character working on Hales as she writes her book seems to add unnecessary emphasis on the need to highlight the shortcomings of predecessors, rendering some of her criticisms of others weak or a little unfair. And I mean unfair as in taking a citation slightly out of context in order to be able to critique it. And I don't think actually Hales is a particularly urgent example of this phenomenon, nor do I think she was being any more disingenuous than I was being when I wrote my article. And I think I'm only mentioning her because it's just what I happened to be reading at the time of thinking about research character. But I later began to see this phenomenon working in other scholarly texts too, in the humanities, and seeing this drive to critique and identify weaknesses in preceding ideas, even when it may not be very accurate or even necessary to succeed in making a scholarly contribution. And I just want to be clear at this point and say this is not an attack on the academic or scholarly character, nor is it an attack on the practice of identifying a gap and filling it. Both of these things are useful and successful for a reason. In fact, some authors, like Harold Bloom in his book The Anxiety of Influence, suggest that certain misreadings, or what Bloom calls misprisions of predecessors, are a necessary part of a creative endeavour. You have to reckon with your inheritance and prepare the ground somehow for the difference you want to make. So whatever creative output you come up with, it does something to predecessors, and sometimes that can be a form of violence. But rather than focus on the specific act of the utility or the hazards of misreading predecessors, my purpose here is simply to draw attention to the fact that not only do we play characters, characters also play us. The academic character has a certain inertia, and when we don it like an outfit, it can also take us for a ride. Certain duties and practices attend the academic character, just as attend any other kind of character. So when I wrote my text in my academic character, it was as if the very character position or frame of mind that I adopted was making certain decisions for me in advance and in some way determining the kind of knowledge that I was able to produce. And still, this is not a problem. It is necessary to adopt a frame of mind to think, and a character is a frame of mind. This is kind of my silly diagram of different characters you could inhabit, a parental character or a runner character or the academic character. So it's necessary to adopt a frame of mind to think, and a character is a frame of mind. And the thing is, any character that is adopted at any given time will have its affordances and blindnesses. But a problem arises when we believe the academic character to be more sincere, honest, truthful, or objective than another character. This is my me scrolling through my YouTube channel with my different character performances. So as a practice-based researcher whose entire project consists of video performances of myself being inhabited by different characters, and from whom I've learned so much about this idea of authenticity, this is a particularly poor error to make. So I'll give some brief examples here of what I mean by thinking in other characters. So I'll play a minute. These are just excerpts of 3 different characters I've inhabited or was inhabited by. And this is something I've been doing for a long time, and different things come out of this for me. So here's a first example.
Well, it didn't take me long to realise, did it, that I'd been subsumed into suburbia. It just came about quite organically. I didn't even think about it. And then I realised that the world is a stage. A bit like, who said that? Was it Brecht or somebody like that? The world's a stage and I've just been one of its players. No, that's Shakespeare, that is. Yeah, so I'm one of the world's players, and you realise that actually we're all following these social scripts, and I've landed into suburbia before I could say Kansas, you know. The funny thing is though, is that I'm not sure, is suburbia Kansas or is it the Emerald City? I'm not really sure. Because the Emerald City is like the dream world, isn't it? Well,
oh, let me get out. Yeah, so that was one character. And this is a bit of a side point, but I would say this is an example where this character was affected by my readings and things like that. So in a way, the direction goes from my thinking and reading into the performing, but that direction can go in the other way too, as we might see in some other examples. So this is another recent work, or just an excerpt from it.
People are a bit surprised to find me in this sort of positioning, because they would like to actually face me without me being perpendicular to them. But I say, like, maybe, you know, why should I be turned vertical? Maybe you should be turned horizontal. There is no up and down in the world, and so you can choose, you know, your orientation, and there should be a freedom of expression in one's orientation of choice. And when I started to speak out about the choice of orientation, then the head I realized it was not just me, but a lot of people in the world decided that actually they relate to that. They find they're more expressive through the sideways version of themselves than the.
So that work kind of turned into a sort of a speculative fiction style story, you know. And while I was in this character, probably because I was in this position lying down and things like that, it's allowed me to come up with ideas that I never thought of before, just being in this different frame of mind. And to me, this final example is an excerpt from like a 40-minute video in which I'm actually inhabiting 2 characters at the same time, and I'm having a conversation between them. And that was kind of an important moment in my research, because this character here, who's going to be speaking now, came up with something that became important to my thesis later. It's going to be a part of the thesis. And I'd never thought about that in my, what you could call my dominant character, my everyday sort of personas. So in a way, these characters enable me to think things I usually can't think of. And this is in conversation with her. So I'm going to just play a minute of that as well.
But what if there were a kind of politics of the self? And I'm not talking now about government or society, I'm talking about one individual. And the fact that we are a community. So how do we negotiate the fact that some of us are more dominant than others? How do we negotiate the hierarchy that is placing me in a definitive position below you? Not to make things awkward or uneasy, but, maybe I'll place that question to you. So I'm not sure if I actually believe in this myself, of like a politics of like inner self, but even as a kind of speculative notion, it's kind of interesting, don't you agree? I've actually never thought of that before. The idea that, there's a certain, and I think I agree with you that I'm not really sure whether that's really problematic, whether it's really problematic or not. But what if...
So that was a really weird experience for me, because I literally just went on talking like this for ages and having what felt like, to me it felt like a real conversation with another person. Anyways, so despite this long-standing practice of experiencing myself, having thoughts that are variously enabled and disabled by different characters I play, I have fallen prey to the idea that over here in my practice is where I play roles and experiment with being different people. This is where I deceive and manipulate viewers. And over here in my dissertation is where I write in this dissertation where I write my academic commentary. Over here, I'm stepping out of pretending and being honest and straightforward with you, my reader, about what there is to learn about these artworks. But the very belief in my own sincerity when adopting the academic character is precisely what makes me more insincere, more manipulative in my dissertation writing, at least so far. I'm hoping to change that, than in these video works where everyone who knows me can tell I'm putting on a voice and acting. In fact, the artwork, the artifice is in this sense more truthful. Okay. So I guess I can go back to these two here. The crux of the problem is this, I think. Although my modern, conscientious academic character declares her position to be partial within a community of individuals, the academic character itself passes undeclared as a partial character within the community of the self. And with that, she hazards the very exclusion she hopes to mitigate. Only now it's happening on an individual level, not like a societal level. My character pledges herself to the pursuit of knowledge, yet she has forgotten to raise her arm and say, I'm now playing a role. I'm searching for some knowledge through this role that may hopefully bring some reassurance or relief to the rest of my person after I'm done performing the role. At the very least, in future, I will write with an awareness and recognition of my academic character. I'm going to go back to my different character frames. I want to step back and ask the question, or think about, who ought to be doing the thinking here? Is it the running athlete character at the expense of the academic character, or the academic character at the expense of the runner character? Someone must be forsaken in the enterprise, after all. If a character is a frame of mind, what is the right frame of mind to adopt in the research project? To be sure, as the running character helps me improve my athletic performance by allowing me not only to run, but to be a runner, the academic character is a hard-won enabler of knowledge pursuit. But it may not be the only character we wish to consult on the research project. There are other characters that can think for us or think for me. They are differently enabled and limited in their own ways. In this way of working with characters, ability and limitation are two sides of the same coin, or there is a third thing without a name yet, which encompasses both. For now, let's call that thing character. It's a kind of thought infrastructure. So this is just one of the reasons why I'm experimenting with the idea of writing a video thesis. And in this sense, as I'm recording now, I'm thinking of this as a writing process. So one of the reasons is I want to avoid inadvertently giving primacy of interpretation to the printed letter, which carries with it connotations of the sincerity of academic character. A video thesis enables me to include my academic character alongside the panoply of other characters that feature in my video performance-based work and place them on a level playing field. My academic character is just one of the many frames of mind or characters in which to do my research. In conclusion, I pretend because I don't want to pretend.